everyone, welcome back to Cars and Zebras. Today I have another featured drag race, so I sure hope that you enjoy it. If you do find it entertaining, make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel because I do post these videos regularly, and also make sure to share it with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. I do appreciate you watching, and with that said, let's check out our featured drag race. This is a 1974 Chevrolet Chevelle, and I love this car. I mean, just look at this thing. You don't even see them anymore, and that's what makes this car so unique and just so cool. But I think we can all admit that 1974 was a rather strange year for the Chevelle. There was a big redesign in 1973, and after that, they eliminated the Supersport package. It was gone for 1974. So if you were looking for something even remotely similar, you'd have to go with the Laguna Type S3. Ugh. That thing just screams the 1970s. And I think that's why I like the Chevelle just so much more. It's very simple looking, but it's a big block Chevrolet stuffed into a mid-size car with rear wheel drive. I mean, that's a muscle car. The 454 in the Chevelle that year was rated 235 horsepower and 360 pound-feet of torque. But when I reviewed the stat sheet for this specific car, it stated it was coming in at 270 horsepower. But I believe the owner had stated that this was originally a 6-cylinder car, but he swapped in a period-correct 454. So I suspect he actually used an LS4, that being the 454 that was in the Corvette that year. It had a slightly hotter cam than the version in the Chevelle, and therefore that engine put out 270 horsepower at 4,400 RPM and 380 pound-feet of torque at 2,800 RPM. Now keep in mind, that might sound a little bit low, but those were net ratings. And you might need to just hold on to your pants right now, but it came in with a blistering compression ratio of 8 1/4 to 1.
That was it? Oh my God.
But, you know, smog era, unleaded gas, yada yada yada, that was pretty much on track with what everybody else had. There were several transmissions available that year. The standard was actually a 3-speed manual. If you had the 454, you could upgrade to a 4-speed manual, that being the M21, but this car features the transmission that was in 97% of Chevelles that year, and of course, it's the 3-speed automatic. Rear gearing on this specific car is a very highway-friendly 308, which might struggle a little bit off the line because the curb weight for the 1974 Chevelle was 4,277 pounds, with this specific big-boned Chevrolet coming in at 4,346 pounds. That is chunky. As usual, the pricing for the 1974 Chevelle was very fair. The base model started at just over $3,000, but really none of those came with the 454. If you wanted that engine, you were probably going to have to upgrade to the Laguna Type S3 or maybe the Malibu Classic. And for one of those, it's going to put you back around $4,000. So if we adjust for inflation, that would be around $21,000 today, and that's a pretty good deal. And if you think this 1974 Chevelle with a 454 is a little bit odd, just wait until you see its opponent. This is a 1957 Ford Custom 300, and it might look like a Fairlane, but it's not. It's a Custom 300. Though they do look somewhat similar, the Custom 300 had a wheelbase that was 2 inches shorter than the Fairlane. But let's just all take a moment and really enjoy the styling of this car, because it is absolutely beautiful. And I mean, do I really need to say it, but this car is freaking awesome! And I haven't even got to the best part yet. That's the engine. There were a couple of engines available, but let's just focus on the V8s, specifically the 312 cubic inch version. You could get that with either 245 horsepower or 270 horsepower, which in itself is already very impressive for 1957. But you know what? This car doesn't have just the regular old run-of-the-mill 312 V8. Yes, you are seeing that correctly. It has a Paxton Supercharger. And I think we all know that superchargers are game changers when it comes to power. Oh my god, I love this car! You could actually get this Paxton Supercharger on any Ford in 1957 as long as it had the 312 V8. Didn't matter if it was a four-door or a wagon or a coupe. If you're paying for it, they're gonna throw that bad boy on there. Ford conservatively rated these engines at 300 horsepower. Paxton said they had 360 horsepower. But truthfully, depending on the cam, they really made about 325 to 340 gross horsepower. To manage the boost, there was a compression ratio of 8.5 to 1. And speaking of forced induction, this thing, when it got spinning, would make between 4.5 and 6 pounds of boost, which then pushed out 340 pound-feet of torque at 4,300 RPM. And that paired with the 300 plus horsepower in 1957, this thing was a rocket. I mean, really, what is not to love about this car? It's freaking awesome! This is a great example of a car that just makes you stop for a second and really stare at it. You know, maybe even put it in reverse.
Bag up, bag up. Bag up, Terry. Put it in reverse, Terry. Put it in reverse. Oh, Lord. Lord, Jesus. Oh, Lord.
There were only a couple of transmissions available that year. The standard was a 3-speed manual. This car actually features the 3-speed automatic, which was the Ford-O-Matic, and it was actually the last year for that transmission. The next year, it would change just a little bit, and it was from there on out called the Cruise-O-Matic. Anyway, I mean, yeah, it's technically a 3-speed automatic, but in everyday driving, it would actually start in second gear and then shift to third. But if you manually drop it into low, it will start in first. And even though the automatic transmission wasn't the most efficient, it was fairly reliable. But you know what? The rear end on this car makes up for that transmission just a little bit because it is stuffed with 411 gears. And not only does the Ford have a little bit better gearing than the Chevrolet, it also has a significant weight advantage because it's coming in at 3,810 pounds. If you're keeping track, that's about 500 pounds lighter than the Chevelle. Let's talk about pricing because this car was a pretty good deal in 1957. The base model Custom 300 started out at $2,105. The Supercharger kit for the car was $325 and installation was another $65. So you could be out the door with a supercharged Ford Custom 300 for a grand total of $2,495. Now, of course, that was 1957, so adjusting for inflation, that'd be about $22,800 today. So yeah, it's a little bit more expensive than the Chevelle, but this thing, come on, supercharged. But what's even more impressive is if you compare it to the equivalent Chevrolet of that year. The cheapest 57 Chevrolet with a V8 was the two-door sedan, and it started at $2,338. But the only engine they had available that was somewhat comparable to this car was the Super Turbofire 283 V8. It had fuel injection, and it made 283 horsepower, but it was a $550 option. So that Super Turbofire 283 V8 was gonna come in at about $2,900. Whereas the Ford with the Supercharger you could get for about $2,500. So yeah, that's a pretty good deal. Let's talk production numbers. The two-door Custom 300 sold very well. They made over 160,000 cars in just that version. But as far as how many came with the Supercharger, well, that was a little bit more difficult to track. For all passenger cars from Ford, they estimate there were about 1,500 in 1957 that came with that Supercharger. On top of that, there were just over 200 that were placed into Thunderbirds, and there were even a rare couple placed into Ford Rancheros. Anyway, I love both of these cars, and they're making my pants tight, so let's check out those drag races.
Two very unusual cars this event because we have some low compression cars that no one ever thinks about, and here's a car that kind of John Lawrence has a 1974 Chevelle Ford, local production 235 horsepower, going against Frank Rice from Bristol. Red Supercharged Ford Custom 300. Probably one of the fastest cars in the late 50s. I believe the serial number Supercharged engine is F, as in Frank. Usually you see them in Thunderbirds, they call it F.
Again, thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. Please make sure that you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future drag race videos. And of course, I'll see you at the next one.